Hello class, this is Dr. Harden, and in this brief tutorial we're going to take a look at the 8 elements of what your textbook calls the lifespan perspective. When taken together, these components provide an interpretive framework which helps us understand your human development. Let's begin with the first assumption. The first assumption is that development is lifelong. It doesn't just end with adulthood. It continues all the way until we die. That brings us to the next foundational assumption, and that is that our development is multidimensional. By this we mean that your body, your mind, your emotions are changing at all times. All these components affect each other. So if one changes in one direction, then another changes in another direction, that kind of thing. So that brings us to the third foundational assumption, and that is that development is multidirectional. Some components will expand over a given period of time, and then others or other dimensions will shrink to compensate for that expansion, which brings us to our fourth assumption. And the fourth assumption is that development is plastic. Now, plasticity means that there's always a capacity for change. Growth is always possible, although it might be limited. In other words, except in very rare circumstances, you can always grow and learn. Which brings us to our fifth developmental assumption, and that is that development is multidisciplinary. It's not just psychologists who are interested in development, it's also sociologists, neuroscientists, medical researchers. They're also interested in development. And each discipline adds to our understanding of the overall picture of development. Our sixth foundational assumption is what we would call contextual. In other words, development does not occur in a vacuum. Our environment also contributes to our development. And some of those environmental influences may be first our culture. The textbook defines culture as behavior patterns, beliefs, and all other products of a particular people group that are passed through from generation to generation. So our culture makes a difference in our development. Also, our ethnicity matters. The textbook author defines ethnicity as the characteristic based on cultural heritage, nationality, characteristics, race, religion, and language. That helps shape our development and who we ultimately become. Another influencing factor would be our socioeconomic status. Our socioeconomic status refers to the grouping of people with similar occupational, educational, and economic characteristics. The next influence would be our gender. When we mean gender, the textbook author defines it as the characteristics of people as male or females. Males and females are simply different, and this will affect development. The last thing that we deal with, or that we have to look at, is how social policy can also shape our development. This is the government's course of action designed to promote the welfare of its citizens. You think of things like Lyndon Johnson's Great Society initiative. You think of affirmative action in the 70s. You think of the Just Say No campaign against drugs in the 80s, and so on and so forth. And we see that these executive mandates will help shape the environment in which we all grow up and develop. And so it's just important to understand that, like I said before, we don't develop in a vacuum, and these are some of the things that influence that development. Well, that brings us to our next assumption. Assumption 7 is that growth, maintenance, and regulation of loss. And what we see here is that throughout our lives, we encounter conflicts that we have to learn to work through. Perhaps it's learning how to do one's multiplication tables in 3rd or 4th grade. Perhaps it's learning how to drive a car. It could be that as you get a little bit older, where you used to be strong and could do things, now you have to make accommodations. Even tasks such as simple as opening a jar now become more difficult, and you have to figure out ways to overcome that limitation in your development. But these kind of things are all a reality that we understand, and as we look at development from a life development perspective. Which brings us to our eighth assumption, is that development is a co-construction of biology, culture, and the individual. Development, for lack of a better term, has many cooks in the kitchen. The final product, though, is a stew of all of these different influences that we've talked about. Well, if we can learn these 8 elements and how they complement one another, we will be well on our way to understanding how human development works. We'll have the framework we need through these core 8 foundational assumptions to understand the entire subject that we're studying of human development. Well, I hope this tutorial has been helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. God bless, and we'll talk again soon.